Exodus in chapter 1. Exodus in chapter 1. Let's notice here in verse 6. And Joseph died and all his brethren and all that generation. And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, and multiplied and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them. And now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them. What he's really saying is just shrewdly, to treat them very poorly. And he says here, and lest they multiply, and it came to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies, and fight against us. So get them up out of the land. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters, to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor. And that is just with harshness and severity. The king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives. And he said to them, of course, these ones, the midwives, the leaders of them, I believe here, the ones named Shiphrah and Puah, he said, when you do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, see them upon the stools. Now this here is meaning it really means almost like a concrete bath where they would bring the children out and they would clean them off when they were born. What he's really saying is that if you see that the child is a male, then I want you to drown them in those concrete baths. That's what he's telling them. He says here, he says, when you see that and you see upon them the stools, if it be a son, then you will kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God. That's the problem we have in today's society. We have over 65 million babies that have been aborted. There is no fear of God in America. Very little. There's not much fear of God within the church because there's not much speaking out against that. There's words, but there's not much being done and not much prayer about it either. But again, these midwives, they feared God more than they feared Pharaoh. And they did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men, children alive. And of course, the king of Egypt found out that this was taking place, that the male children were being kept alive. And he said, why have you done this thing? Of course, the midwives, now they were a little deceitful in this. Some of it probably was true. Because again, the Hebrew women, they were laboring much more than the Egyptian women. And so in their labors and everything else, it was a little easier for them to have children and to have it quickly and not have a midwife there at the time. But again, he says, why is this taking place? And they said, well, the Hebrew women, they're lively. He said that they're delivering long before the midwives come in to help them. And we notice verse 20, therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very mighty. And it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that he made them houses. The idea here is God made them households. He blessed them, and they increased in their own families. You think about that, the choice that they had. They didn't know that this was going to take place. They didn't know that they were going to be blessed by the Lord. All they knew was what was right. And all they knew is to follow God and to simply trust him and fear him and reverence him more than Pharaoh. And that's what they did. And we see here again, they did this in the face of potential suffering. William Gurnall, Puritan, in the 1600s, I believe, he said, we fear men so much because we fear God so little. We fear men so much because we fear God so little. This morning, I already preached about, I think it was about 7:30 at that time. This was, and I mentioned it before, at times I get on a Zoom call and preach to a group in Pakistan. And it's wonderful to know that you can do that. But the ones that were there, they were at a brick kiln there in Pakistan. Of course, a lot of it was children and women. There were some men in the crowd. But The sad reality is that now the ones there, they were Christians. But what takes place there in Pakistan is that Muslims are a lot. There's Muslim groups that are over the brick kilns. And what they'll do is they'll enslave the Christians. And they will be harsh on them. Very similar when we think about what took place with the Pharaoh and what he did against the Israelites. But what they'll do is they will tell them, well, this is all your wages. And we're giving you a place to lodge and stay. Really, they're just enslaved. But they'll say, we're giving you a place to lodge and stay. And they'll give them a little bit for food. But what they'll do is they'll get it as a loan. So the person that's working the brick kilns, they are making just slightly less than what they can to pay off the loans. Why do they do that? Well, they do it to enslave them and to stay that way for years and years. By the way, they will underwrite some things and they will treat them a little better if they do what? What do you think? If they convert to Islam. See, we don't have a clue, do we? We don't have a clue. And I preaching to them and seeing the looks on their faces, and of course, man, you just see it all over them. How broken. But they choose to fear God than to fear man. We fear men so much because we fear God so little. Or we need the fear of God in our hearts and lives. These midwives, that's the way it was with them. In Ecclesiastes in chapter 8 and verse 12, look with me what it says here in Ecclesiastes in chapter 8 and verse 12. Ecclesiastes in chapter 8 and verse 12. It's believed that Solomon wrote Ecclesiastes, and here he writes here in verse 12, though a sinner do evil 100 times, and his days be prolonged, yet surely I know that it shall be well with them that fear God. Though a sinner does evil hundreds of times in his days, and it seems like his life is being prolonged, everything may be going right. The reality, even though it may seem like that with our eyes, we see it. But he says, in my heart, I know that those who fear God, it will be well with them, which fear before him. And notice in verse 13, but it shall not be well with the wicked, neither shall he prolong his days, which are as a shadow, because he does not fear God. There's no fear of God. So even at this point, Solomon, even at the point of his life where he said everything's vanity, he says, I know something here. The reality is it doesn't matter where it seems like the wicked are getting away scot-free. And it does seem like the sad reality. But I'm telling you, you better understand that it will be well, always well, for the one who fears God, far above fearing man. So we've got to get back to that place. I have to place myself there in the shoes of the midwives in the fact that what would I have done at that point? Because again, they had no clue that God was going to bless them. They had no clue that God was going to increase their homes because of the choice that they did. And again, they had every potential to face suffering and really to be killed. That Pharaoh, if he knew, but we see God took care of them because they feared God more than they feared man. What do we do in the face of potential suffering? I think that sadly, oftentimes we haven't ever really experienced the persecution like others have to come to that place. But that is a question for us as well. Now I want us to turn here to Numbers chapter 13. Look with me in Numbers in chapter 13. Numbers in chapter 13, and look in chapter 13, and we'll look here in verse 25. Numbers 13 and verse 25. And they returned from searching of the land after 40 days. There were spies that were sent out to go and to search the land there in Canaan and to see the blessings that would be given to them. God promised them. He would promise them he'd be with them, promised them that he would give them their land and that they would conquer and have the victory. But the spies were sent out to go and search the land, and they came back and they went and came to Moses and to Aaron and to all the congregation, the children of Israel, into the wilderness of Paran, to Kadesh. And they brought back word unto them and unto all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told them and said, we came unto the land whither you sent us, and surely it flows with milk and honey, and this is the fruit of it. Now again, the term here is just simply, it is a land blessed. It's a land that is fruitful. It's a land that again, that we won't want for anything. We won't lack for anything. It's a place that is blessed. But the thing is, yes, there's food. Yes, there's enough refreshments. Yes, there's enough for us to live off of. It's a blessed land. Nevertheless, the people are strong that dwell in the land. And the cities are all the people. There's so many people and they're strong. They're so strong. And then think about the cities that are there, the fortresses. Boy, it's just all walled. It'll be hard to get to that place. And it's very great. And moreover, we saw the children of Anak there. Well, that, if you read about that and actually research it, these are giants. These are giants. And by the way, they were far bigger giants than Goliath. Goliath may have been, it seemed like about 10 feet high, but I'm telling you, there were giants. If you do research and you read, and you'll find that the terminology in some of it, actually, there were giants far taller than Goliath. So they said, the giants are there. And the Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains. Well, if you go here, here's the Amalekites. If you go here, here's the Hittites and the Jebusites. Here's the Amorites. And the Canaanites, they dwell by the sea. If we go anywhere, we're going to face problems. We're stuck in between a rock and a hard place. And everyone began to, with this, they began to whine and complain and murmur. Oh, we're going to die, we're going to die, we're going to die. We can't do this. We can't do this. Almost every single spy said the same thing. Same thing. I think about it like the news media. If you don't think the news media, there's 90% of the news is owned by six companies. That's it. 90% of all the news is owned by 6 companies. And by the way, every single company all has the same view. Same view. See, you're just getting the same thing over and over. Now, they'll kind of make it seem like it's a little different, a little bit, but I'm telling you, it's not. It's not. That's where we are here in America. This is where we are in most countries, sadly. But this is where they were. That most of the spies said the same thing. Oh, it's too tough, too hard. We can't do it. We can't go. They're too big, too strong, too fortified. Not going to be able to happen. Yes, there's blessings there. Yes, the land is good. But if we go, they're going to consume us. If we go, they're going to fight against us. We're going to be destroyed. But notice verse 30. And Caleb stilled the people. He quieted them down before Moses, and he said, let us go at once. I mean, put yourself there. Would you be the one with all the 10 and say, oh yeah, they're right. Well, listen, if all 10, Caleb's just one. If all 10 were saying the same thing, it's got to be right? Trust the experts. Trust the experts. Caleb said, let's go immediately. Why are we waiting? Why are we being idle? Wouldn't you like to have that unction? Wouldn't you like to have that tenacity? That boldness? Everyone else is saying, no, we can't do it, we can't do it, we can't do it. And Caleb says, what are we waiting for? Let's go. He says, let's go up to possess it at once and possess it, for we are able to overcome it. Is that because he's so confident in himself? Is that because he thinks he's something great? No, he trusts God. And he believes in God's promises, and he rejoices in that, and he knows that God is able to carry them through. By the way, for the longest time, what's been happening as they're going through the wilderness is God has been a pillar of cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night. God has been leading them over and over, and they're still complaining and whining and saying they can't do it. But it says here, in verse 31, but the men that went up with them said, we are not able to go against the people, for they're stronger than we are. So what? So what? They're bigger. So what? If God be for us, who can be against us? If God be for us, who can be against us? And it says here, they brought up an evil report of the land. Really, they were exaggerating in this, probably even trying to exaggerate even more than it was, and trying to scare people and fear, cause negativity, again, just like the media does. But then we notice we go on. It says, the land, though which we have gone to search it, is a land that eats up the inhabitants thereof, and all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. And this is that term here. We saw giants. Nephilim is the term. And they said here, the sons of Anak, which are like, they're giants and they're so big, we're like grasshoppers in their sight. So Caleb says, let's go right now immediately. And they say, no, you don't understand. Oh, and now, boy, the evil report starts coming. They say, no, listen, see, they're so high. I mean, we're just small grasshoppers compared to that. And the land is just destructive. You remember when they were talking about the blessings and the food, but then now they're saying, oh, everything's just been eaten up, everything's being gobbled up, everything's being consumed. It's not anything that you want to worry about. And of course, then we find in chapter 14, it says in verse 1, all the congregation lifted up their voice and they cried, and the people wept that night. Everyone crying and weeping. And God is very angry with the children of Israel. Angry over their doubts, angry over their unbelief, angry over their rebellion. And Moses ends up interceding on their behalf. God is going to wipe them out. Moses prays for the people. In verses 13 through 19, he prays. He said, God, you're a God of mercy. And he prays for them. And what we notice here in verse 20, it says, in Numbers 14, and the Lord said, I have pardoned according to thy word. Moses being the intercessor. And God says, I pardon. But it's according to your word. But as truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord. So that's the sad thing, is that the people forgot that it's all about the glory of God. They were afraid. They looked at everything else around them. God says, I've brought you out. I will carry you. I will deliver you. I will lead you. And notice it says to go on in verse 23 or in verse 22, because all those men which have seen my glory and my miracles, which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, they have tested me now these 10 times. They've not hearkened to my voice. Surely they shall not see the land which I swore unto their fathers, neither shall any of them that provoked me see it. They had unbelief. They doubted, they bickered, they complained, and they will never see the promised land. They will die in the wilderness. But notice verse 24, but my servant Caleb, because he had another spirit with him, because he had a different spirit. I mean, wouldn't you like to say that you'd be like Caleb? That different spirit in the life. Where everybody else is saying it's all bad, it's all bad, it's all bad, we can't do it. To be that one person to step up and say, let's go right now. Let's go immediately. God says he has a different spirit. And he said, and he has followed me fully. Him will I bring into the land whereunto he went, and his seed shall possess it. So we see the midwives there in the face of potential suffering. They said, we're going to stand firm no matter what. We may die, but it doesn't matter. We know what's right, and we fear God more than Pharaoh. And we see what God did. God blessed them. And now we see Caleb. Caleb in the midst of the crowd, and when everybody else is saying, no, we can't do it, he says, I believe God, and we could go right now and take it over. And God says he's got a different spirit in him, and I'm going to bless him. I'm going to bless him. In the face of potential suffering, in the face of insurmountable odds, how do we respond? How do we react? Caleb faced the deceit of the spies. He faced the discouragement of the people. He faced the dangers of the land. Yes, it was dangerous, but in all of that, he said, I'm going to go. God will lead us through and give us the victory. And of course, this is stated as well in Deuteronomy in chapter 1. In the same way, but I want you to turn with me to 2 Timothy. Look with me in 2 Timothy chapter 4. Look what Paul says in 2 Timothy in chapter 4. 2 Timothy in chapter 4, in verse 16. Paul at his trials, when he was in prison and he was being tried, he says here in verse 16, at my first answer, no one stood with me, but all forsook me. I pray God that it may not be laid to their charge. Notwithstanding, the Lord stood with me and strengthened me, that by me the preaching might be fully known, and that all the Gentiles might hear. And I was delivered out of the mouth of the lion, And the Lord shall deliver me from every evil work, and will preserve me unto his heavenly kingdom, to whom be glory forever and ever. Amen. Forever and ever. Amen. Would you be like Caleb? I sit there and I think, Lord, I pray I would, but I don't think I would. I think for the most part, the sad reality, we might follow the crowd and say, well, Caleb's just one person. And it just doesn't look good. And statistically, numerically, everything, it just seems like there's no hope. God wants the Spirit within our hearts and lives. By the way, it's the Spirit of Christ, but that Spirit that says, no matter what, it may seem insurmountable, but God can do above, beyond all that we ask or think. And we press on. And now we notice something else. Go to Numbers in chapter 25. Hudson Taylor says, missionary to China, he said, God is not looking for men of great faith. He's looking for common men to trust his great faithfulness. God is not looking for those of great faith. He's looking for common people to trust his great faithfulness. That's what Caleb did in his life. Look with me in Numbers in chapter 25. Numbers 25, and look in verse 1. Now, we don't have time to go into the backdrop of this, but when you begin to read before this, you read about Balaam. Balaam was supposed to be a prophet of God. He was supposed to be a testimony to the people. But the fact was, Balaam, he loved money more than he loved God. And Balak, the king of Moab, he sought to have the Israelites cursed. And so he tried to give money to Balaam to have him curse the Israelites. Now, there's a whole story that goes with that, and it's interesting what happens. Of course, the donkey begins to speak, begins to talk. God opens the mouth of the donkey, of Balaam's donkey, and you can read about that as well. But Balaam, what you find over and over is that he tries to somehow weasel his way into getting money and still not being the bad guy. In the end, he does try to curse the children of Israel, but what happens is blessings come out of his mouth. And he even pronounces and prophesies the coming of Christ. Not really what he wanted, but here, God gave him that vision. And Balak gets so angry, he says, look, don't even curse him or bless him. He said, I wanted to curse him, and 3 times you blessed him. And what does Balaam do? Balaam says, we can't curse them really with any kind of incantation or any kind of thing like that. God won't allow that. But he said, I know how you can get to the people. He said, you can get to their hearts. The devil knows, by the way. The gates of hell will not prevail, but what can he do? He can get in the church, can't he? And he can cause disruption in the body. And he can get in your heart. And he can cause things where you hang on to and it pulls you away from God. And that's what happened. He said, if you get your women near them, if you get let them marry your women, and you begin to influence them to worship idols, and you get their hearts away from God, then they'll be cursed in their hearts. And that's what happened. And this is where we are. It says in verse 1, Israel abode in Shittim, and the people begun to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab. You see, it's beginning to happen. Balak says, all right, that's what I'll do. So they began to play the harlot, is really the meaning here, and they called the people unto the sacrifices of their gods. And the people did eat and bowed down to their gods. And Israel joined himself unto Baal Peor. That's the god Baal. Oh, you ought to look up, read about the archway of Palmyra. You may not have heard of that, but when ISIS went into Syria and ransacked the area there, they tore down an archway. It was an archway to Baal, actually. It was an archway where people would enter in, they'd go worship Baal. And they tore the archway down. You know what happened though? NATO, United Nations, or what they made sure it was rebuilt. And they were calling it the archway of Baal, but people got really mad, so now they call it the archway of Palmyra. But you know what they did with that archway? They put it in New York City. They put it there. And then they put it in London. And then they put it in India and Dubai. And they put it in all these different economic centers in the world. Why did they do that? Well, they said it was just for history, It was just no. And they even put it on the same day that was a special day, Beltane, that worship of Baal, the worship of Baal. Oh, you won't hear that on the news. You won't hear that. They did that in 2016, 2017. You can go and look that up. But again, this is what was happening here as well. The children of Israel began to worship Baal, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. And the Lord said unto Moses, take all the heads of the people and hang them, the people that are worshiping, committing idolatry. Hang them there in the sun for all to see, that the fierce anger of the Lord may be turned away from Israel. And Moses said unto the judges of Israel, slay every one who joined with Baal, every one who worship idols here that have joined up, committed idolatry, committed adultery, committed harlotry, all of these things. And behold, one of the children of Israel came and brought unto his brethren a Midianite woman. And it was in the sight of Moses and all the congregation. They didn't care. They were having a good time, and they brought this woman. And they brought them there for his brethren. And it says here it was in the sight of Moses and in the sight of all the congregation, the children of Israel, who were weeping before the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. You know, that's where the church needs to be, is weeping, broken over what's going on. But what's sad is that people were weeping and broken, and this person doesn't care. They're walking, they're bringing this woman here, this Midianite woman, and they're laughing and living it up, and it's in the sight of the whole congregation. And when Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, saw it, he rose up from among the congregation. He took a spear, a javelin in his hand, and he went after the man of Israel into the tent, and he thrust both of them through, the man of Israel and the woman, through their belly. Now again, I know that's graphic, but you have to see something about Phinehas, though. He did something, again, he took it in his own hands, and he said, I'm sick of it. Something has to be done. Now, I'm not saying here to commit some violence or anything else, but there was something in Phinehas. He had a zeal about him that when he saw the wickedness, he didn't sit back and stay silent. He did something about it. But here we are. What do we have? Well, we have idolatry for sure. One of the biggest idols right now is the idol of the LGBTQ. That's an idol. Because it's not about what God has chosen. It's not about how you live. Oh, you follow your heart. Do what you feel like. This is, and again, you have your priest. You have your priest. By the way, they have, if you saw where the Dodgers not long ago, where they had these transgender individuals to come out, and they performed a ceremony at the Dodgers Stadium. What was it? They had a one who looked almost like a stripper, but a sick, nasty transgender that was there hanging on a cross. And they had a person dancing around them. Oh, don't say anything. They all dressed almost like they were Catholic priests. They were mocking Christianity, the reality, but they were mocking all that. But they said, oh, it's free speech, free speech, free speech. And people just say, well, don't say anything. Don't say anything. You don't want to be called a bigot, do you? Well, Phinehas, what happened with him, he couldn't take it anymore. He did something about it. And I want you to notice here as we go on, in the face of the societal wickedness, Phinehas did not sit idly by and say nothing. Sadly, we have become accustomed to the dark. And we've used the illustration many times where you talk about dimming the lights. But what happens? You flip the light switch quickly, and yes, you'll notice it. But if you just dim the lights, little by little, your eyes get adjusted. And that's where we are. We're adjusted to the darkness. Some are adjusted to it, and they don't even see it, and they're living in that darkness. Others just have covered their eyes completely and said, I don't want to see it. I don't want to see the things going on. Well, I'm telling you, you're going to stand before God. And I hope you know you're going to give an account, whether you spoke up, whether you stood on truth. Well, notice what it goes on to say here. It says in verse 9, the plague was stayed from the children of Israel, and those that died in the plague were 24,000. But it was when Phinehas did this that it stopped. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, has turned my wrath away from the children of Israel, while he was zealous for my sake among them. that I consume not the children of Israel in my jealousy. Wherefore say, behold, I give unto him my covenant of peace, and he shall have it, his seed after him, even the covenant of an everlasting priesthood, because he was zealous for his God and made an atonement for the children of Israel. What would you do if you were there? Would you do like the midwives? Would you do like Caleb? And would you do like Phinehas? I know there's been big news about The Sound of Freedom, the movie that came out, and it deals with child trafficking. And of course, there's been a lot of articles coming out and trying to land blast it and say, oh, none of that's true, none of that's going on. When you really dig deep, you find that human trafficking, it is a $150 billion business. 25 million, over 25 million people are trafficked each year. Nobody wants to see it. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to look at it. It's too much. Too much. Or we need to stand up. We need to speak out. And I thank the Lord that the movie is doing well because it is shedding light on some things that has been going on for a long time. There's a story about Teddy Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt, when he was a child, he went to this New York Presbyterian church, and he stood by a window and he peered in the church. And so somebody came and saw him peering in. And they said, hey, you can come into church. And he ran away. And he went and looked and he peered in again. They said, you can come in. You don't have to be scared. And he ran away. And finally, he just took off and ran home. And his mother asked him and said, did you go to church, Teddy? And he said, no, I didn't go. She found out he was terrified of church. She said, there's nothing to be afraid of. Why are you scared? He said, I'm scared of the zeal. I'm scared of the zeal. She said, the zeal? I said, what does that even mean? And he said, I heard the preacher one time, and he talked about the zeal. The zeal. And he said, I think it may be like a dragon or an alligator, and it's waiting. It might come out of the pew and eat me or something. She said, the zeal. So she looked up. She went and got the concordance, and she looked up, and she found this verse. In John 2:17, it says, the zeal of thine house has eaten me up. The zeal of thine house has eaten me up. And boy, Teddy, when he heard that, he thought that zeal's coming and going to eat him. Now, that's an interesting thing. And some of these stories are not true. They're not accurate. They're just kind of fables. I think this one was. And I think to myself, I look and I think, if we only took God's word seriously. Now, he took it a little too far. But he believed it. He believed that zeal, something was going to consume. I think really, if we really took God at his word, one, it wouldn't matter how many pharaohs told us to commit wickedness, we'd stand for God, no matter what. And two, it wouldn't matter if all the crowd, all the spies, everyone was lying, all the media, everything lying through their teeth, but saying, we can't do it. We'd be the first ones to say, we can do it. Let's go. And also, when we see wickedness and all the corruption, we wouldn't sit back and say, well, that's not my problem. Well, that's none of my business. We'd have a zeal for God. And we'd say, we've got to do something. Do something about it. Let's pray.